I've been following your work. For some of my followers who don't know, and your followers, I've been following your work since well, I was quite a young age, doing research on my own on a small like iPod Touch and finding your work and Mike Adams and Vani Hari from foodbabe.com. You guys were like some of the first people, and then that delved me into a whole new world of looking at health totally differently and not really even, I never previously considered the food and the ingredients in our grocery store and
Hmm.
the medications and the supplements. I didn't see it was all around us in this, complex medical system we have here in America. As a kid, we're not taught anything in school about this and what is in our food supply. So it fascinated me when I came across your work. So I want to say thank you, first of all, for the opportunity and for all the work you've done over all the years, all the summits that you've done, all the people you've talked to. Amazing stuff.
Cory, thank you. It's very kind of you, and I'm really equally thrilled that you're here because I can't do it alone. Mike Adams can't do it alone. All these folks that we've been at this for decades. I was never under the delusion. Oh yeah, it's all about me. It's like, no, dude. If I can wake anybody up, one person at a time, good lord, we could create a mountain of people, a million. I mean, whatever it is. Some people use the army terminology. I get it. I'm not into warfare. I'm a peaceful guy, but I also recognize we have to be willing to stand our ground and let the others know that would enslave us. That we're not messing around. You come near me with that syringe, I've got something that'll make a bigger hole. And that's not a threat to violence. It's just an acknowledgement that you are not allowed to violently attack me or my family, my loved ones. And I think that's a mature way of looking at it. But we have been disarmed by those that are, I would say, irrationally peacenik, that are the ones that will not stand up and defend the innocent, whether it be a child or something like that, or themselves. So it's part of a maturation process we're all going through.
Yes, and it has been quite a journey. And as with recent years, all the different things that have happened, I think a lot of people have started to see some of what you've been saying for the past, 10, 20 years and more, I'm sure. Incredible. Like just recently in the chat, somebody just linked Gary Knoll, right? And I found out my grandfather was listening to Gary Knoll, I think, in Brooklyn, which is
Wow.
pretty crazy because, I didn't think, oh, my grandfather was studying this stuff too. And I'm a lot like my grandfather. So it is quite fascinating to see how much work is out there that people are unfamiliar with, or how much medicine exists out there all around us, all throughout nature, that we are completely ignorant of because, again, we aren't taught it. And although the information is right in front of us, right in our fingertips, and now Mike Adams is developing like a new AI, Enoch, to try to make it easier for people to access, people still believe, I got to take my medication and I got to follow the doctor's orders. And what you are doing, what the freedom movement is doing, what the medical movement is doing, and they're coming together, is they're recognizing we need to challenge the authorities, people who are in power, who are telling us how to live our own lives and what to do with our own body, and that we need to take control of our own health. So it's funny you mentioned slavery because it is one of my
Hmm.
actual focal topics that a lot of people interview me on because I wrote a book on slavery. So it just so happens, I didn't mention this to you before the show. I know we're
No.
talking about something totally different, but I wrote a book on slavery and it is quite comprehensive. So I figured to just throw that out there. I actually call myself an abolitionist. And here's a quote from Aldous Huxley, right? Who's somebody who kind of predicted a lot of things that could happen in the future, much like George Orwell. Many people may be familiar with 1984, right? He says a really efficient totalitarian state would be one in which the all-powerful executive of political bosses and their army of managers control a population of slaves who do not have to be coerced because they
Right.
love their servitude.
Yes. I took those books seriously when I read them in high school, Cory, maybe a bit too much, and it planted the seed for my deep dive into not only the history of medicine, because that was my urgent need to overcome the health challenges I was born into in the 1960s and then forward. Chronically ill, like so many children today, I was the canary in the coal mine of Gen X. But I just couldn't, as I pulled the thread on health, I saw it move into the body politic, the body economic, you name it. And so when you write about slavery, I'm so deeply appreciative of that because many are under the false impression that after the so-called Civil War, Lincoln freed the slaves, we had an amendment, etc. But what it did was enslaved everybody economically to a
Mm.
system that would evolve in the 20th century, an international consortium of bankers the money changers, as Jesus was quoted as saying. And so we have a subtle slavery that is not the same as black folks picking cotton in the fields, but everybody basically being owned and controlled and then told what they can keep at the end of the year through this vile tax system that is a key plank to the Communist Manifesto.
Mhm. Well, Scott, a lot of people are going to come on the show or they're going to listen in and say, oh, well, I'm okay with the way things are. I don't feel like a slave. And when you start looking at what the slaves said themselves back in the day and what the abolitionists were saying, you start to see some really strange peculiarities that I tend to go deep into with not just the medical project, but with my study on history. So these two actually relate. So I know we're going to talk about health freedom a lot. There is a link between the two, slavery and medical freedom. In fact, you can even say it's medical slavery, or, many parts of the world you're required to go to the draft. You can call that military slavery. I deduce all the forms of slavery. You mentioned economic slavery. There's also political slavery. There's different things, technological slavery. I deduce it all down to two forms within my work, which is mental slavery and physical slavery, or internal and external. Right? So mental slavery is particularly the focus here in regards to the medical work called Health Revealed, because there is a term that we use to kind of denote what that mental slavery is taking the form of. But I just want to read another quote, and this is from Frederick Douglass. He says, when a slave becomes a happy slave, he has effectively relinquished all that makes him human. And as we move into a world that's increasingly artificial and we don't know who we are, we can say that's a psychosis. We don't know what is real anymore. We don't know thyself, a greatest philosophical teaching. We have to be concerned about if we are perhaps content or trained into our obedience and do not see where we may be enslaving ourselves. So not that even somebody's indoctrinating us, but that we are indoctrinating ourselves. And this is where it gets really tricky, and this is why it shifts to psychology and not just a study of history.
Yeah, well said. Mental slavery, the engrams, the thought forms. The question is, were they our own or were they planted there by someone else for nefarious purposes or reasons? Now, we can talk about the benign nature of advertising, right? I say that with tongue in cheek a little bit, but it really is a form of black magic with higher technology and a higher or deeper understanding of modern psychological principles. How do we get people to do what we want them to do? How do we manipulate them? And there have been experiments in the 20th century that were horrific and brutal that showed that otherwise nice people would be willing to inflict serious harm on others. For instance, if they are convinced that there's no accountability, you're not liable for those events. And that's where we see, I believe, a lot of the vaccine industrial complex operating. No liability, doesn't matter what we do. It's not our fault. We've been told we're absolved by the king, queen, emperor, or in this case, the National Injury Vaccine Compensation Program that was set up in 86 or started then. So yeah, the psychology of this is fascinating and horrifying to discuss, because
Absolutely.
we have to look at ourselves beyond ego and recognize, man, none of us are beyond, let's say, the capacity to be manipulated. Now, I often say this about the smartest people in the country or the world that have the highest level degrees, medical or otherwise. They may be smart in some sense, but they're also the most vulnerable to programming, which is not very impressive. And I call it a medical handicap that they're walking around with, because they've been abused mentally to believe a thing like vaccines are safe and effective. This is like, you're a drone if you believe that. And yet people have a doctorate level education and not only believe it, but worked hard to enforce it for others that didn't believe it.
Man, you hit it on the nail right there. You mentioned a study that took place within the 80s, 70s, and it still continues to this day, although it's banned in many parts of the world, no surprise, called this Dr. Stanley Milgram experiment, where they studied obedience to authority figures.
Yes.
And this is actually one of the core themes that inspired Health Revealed, this project that we have, and you can pull up the website. There's an idea called statism, which is what he was studying, but he did not know that term at the time. That term basically came out of those findings. And what I have to share with you, Robert, and the medical community today is, and unfortunately I have to share this, but also fortunate that I have the ability to share it, and now we've gathered the information, is, I believe, the root cause to the illness that we say is our modern day slavery and the aggregate disease or evil on this earth. Statism, I believe, is that root cause. So, we're trying to find the root cause in medicine when it comes to the body. I'm trying to find what's the root cause to what's going on in the world. I believe it is this. Right now, you can think for yourself as the audience on this. But statism is precisely the belief in authority, but more specifically, the belief in the right to rule. And you have to ask yourself, where does someone get this right to rule? And what happens to the psychology of the victims or the people that believe in that right? And the further you go into this, you're going to come across the works of someone like Larkin Rose, who wrote a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition, and also recently made a movie called The Jones Plantation, which, funny enough, is a historical kind of representation. Although it's more of an entertainment film, it gets people to think a lot about slavery and how it relates to the modern day. They actually go from back then to, oh my gosh, there's this slave owner who is struggling and he needs to find a way. How can he keep his slaves more content? How can he make his slaves more willing to do more work for him and believe that they need to work harder? So they introduce this other slave master who speaks really kind to them, who sounds really appealing, and he introduces like these notes and he introduces these systems to keep themselves in check, and it starts to look a lot like the world we live in now. So, this comparison between slavery now may trigger a lot of people, I know I'm aware of. And like I said, I want everybody to have an open mind. I think most people who are watching your show generally have an open mind to these ideas. The point is that this mindset will challenge many people in the so-called freedom community, because even they are prone to this belief system. They say we need to change the laws, we need to vote people in office, and I'm saying that is still a degree of statism that they do not recognize. They have this mindset instilled in them at a very young age in the schooling system, which is based on the Prussian model of schooling, and they do not see that mindset because it was so programmed within us. So I actually have questions that I ask people that can really nail down, if you have this mindset still within you, and I have developed different quizzes and so forth. But this medical project, Health Revealed, is dedicated to this, and we have over 400 slides and over a 24-hour seminar talking about all the systems and how it relates to the state. And as you can probably assume, the state gets its fingers in everything, getting involved with every aspect of society, whether it's the economy or medicine. But if you start to understand this power of authority, whether it's the authority of doctors or experts or scientists, you should still be your health authority. When we're talking about the authority of governments, we're talking about something even far worse, which is having the ability to do violence when other people don't have that ability, through the use of law. So it's very specific type of authority. It's not just like, there's this person that I look up to who has some really cool insights. I would call that leadership, somebody who voluntarily shares their services, who I want to emulate their actions. But authority is very specific, especially in the way Larkin Rose uses it, to say it is coercive by its nature. And it takes the place of a mafia or a gang, but people perceive it as moral, because they say, I have this right. It says so on a piece of paper. It says so because I have this outfit on, And people still believe this after thousands of years, that if you wear a certain type of fabric and you write something down on a piece of paper, it somehow can alter morality or make something that's not true, true. And this precisely is the deception, which I believe gets to the root cause of a lot of our mass psychosis that's going on right now.
So what can we say the root of the rise of authoritarianism? It didn't just start with Republicans and Democrats or any particular president. We're talking about thousands of years of recorded history, or maybe longer, that we don't know, where we've been programmed lifetime after lifetime to believe in some external authority figure or figures and obey them. And I get it if it's a spiritual perspective and you declare yourself an obedient servant of God, which I'd like to say is different, although we know that human beings have used that vulnerability through organized religion to have people fall prey to that form of authoritarianism as well. Although there is lip service paid to the idea of agency and direct or divine prophecy from, the creator to us individually. So we are in I guess, massive learning curve right now. I think a consciousness shift because of the difficulty and discomfort, let's just put it mildly, that many of us went through during COVID. And it woke many people up, not in a woke sense, but in an awakened sense. The question is, what do we do with it? Do we go part way there and then fall back into a softer authoritarianism? Or do we throw off the shackles and say, I'm ready to be free and this is how I'm going to live? And I don't care what y'all do. I'm not playing your game.
Right. So, the way I look at the work that I do in regards to, why would I write a book on slavery? Why would I do this work with medicine? And I didn't go in with a bias, necessarily when it comes to this medical project, of studying authoritarianism. I looked at every single resource there was out there for authoritarianism, the mindset and all the little intricacies, every single writer you can find, some from Nazi Germany, some from, the communists. Like I looked at every side, every angle, so nobody could say, oh, I'm skewed or I'm pushing a certain agenda. I looked at the psychology, right, which anybody can study anywhere in the world at different points of time. And you'll see there's certain themes, there's certain patterns that you can find among authoritarian leaders. Some were even saying there needs to be an authoritarian classification system, although we're kind of on the fence about classification systems with psychiatry.
Yeah.
That being said, it is important to look at tendencies and what happens in someone's youth, their childhood and their trauma and their insecurities, their fears, because this all plays into this. And you mentioned something kind of important here, which is that good people, some of the nicest people, most trusting people on earth, are the ones who are exploited the most. And it's because of how trusting they are. It's because they see in someone like, oh, he sounds like me. He sounds like he cares about me. For thousands of years, politics has been this art of deceiving people and making it sound as though tyranny is freedom or that chaos is order. And we've been convinced that freedom is chaos and that therefore we should fear freedom. We have been basically kind of looking at things totally in the opposite, and people are seeing this, and they saw it as soon as the abolitionist. So the abolitionists were some of the first voluntarists in history. Now, voluntarism is an idea counter to statism. This is the idea that we can live in a voluntary free world, or that every action should be based on consent. If you go back to the origins of this root, you're going to find 1840s or so. This is the abolitionist, right? And also some people in Russia and other parts of the world who are starting to look at this idea. And what I find fascinating is these abolitionists were building towns for the Underground Railroad. Kind of like what people are doing now, right? Got to go off grid, got to go escape the system, I got to go grow food. And, it's interesting that you see this parallel happening now because people say, man, we got to create a whole parallel system. We need to get out of this if we're going to be truly free. So the abolitionists willingly broke the law. They willingly went to jail. They willingly took slaves off the plantation, taught them how to read and write because that education was kept away from them so they can be further enslaved. And then they empowered them to say, okay, wait, you could be speakers, you could be teachers, and you can help free your fellow man as well. So Frederick Douglass was traveling the States, he's like making all these different speeches and appearances with William Lloyd Garrison. But if you look up William Lloyd Garrison, it's going to say on the Wikipedia, he called himself a no-governmentist. This is just a word back then before they had the word anarchist or voluntarist. Right. And these terms, have gotten quite a reputation over the years, shifting quite a lot. Anarchist, oh, these people with masks on causing chaos. But no, back in those days, anarchist actually meant something that might have been a little bit different. There were some people like Josiah Warren, orchestra leader, inventor, doesn't look like an anarchist at all, but yet is known as the peaceful revolutionist, the practical anarchist, set up like so many different towns and communities, one that went on for like 15 years with like virtually a no crime rate called Modern Times. And it's an incredible thing, right? Modern Times, right? It's like they're predicting the future. They knew that what they were doing was destined for the future. They had the courage and the guts to stand up against chattel slavery, which existed for thousands of years. Now, some of them were religious, some of them were not. You touched on that point. Carl Jung said one of the strongest bulwarks against the state is our relationship with God. So if somebody has that relationship, that can actually potentially make them more powerful. And the abolitionists, used their church networks and their religion to kind of help them in their efforts. Although some were like, well, the churches are supporting slavery, so we kind of got to make our own churches too, right? It's kind of like now, all these systems are kind of in bed with each other. They're all working together. And how are we going to get out of that? So I look at the abolitionists for a lot of inspiration in what they did. And I just want to say that, that history is fascinating and it's not seen, but they were challenging the founding fathers, and they didn't live like more than 100 years after their time, right?
Mhm.
So they were burning the Constitution in the streets. William Lloyd Garrison said it was a covenant of death, an agreement with hell, right? The abolitionists were very radical, but they were just wanting to end slavery. We wouldn't call them radical now, but the newspapers back then were like claiming, oh, they're burning buildings, they're doing all this stuff. They were actually pacifists, most of them, and didn't want to do any violence because they knew the media would brand them. So even then there was censorship. Even then there were attacks. History is just repeating, but we are making steps. The American revolutionists said, hey, the monarchy, there's no such thing as that authority. The abolitionists said, wait, there's no such thing as the authority of the slave master. And then they started to question the authority of the governments, which were protecting the slave master with the Fugitive Slave Act and other things, right? Or even like just look at the words of Lysander Spooner and others like Samuel May and a bunch of like policemen at the time. They would say that, wait, without the centralized government, without the police force, you can't have this privatized slavery. So that was a very interesting perspective. But either way, they were all moving toward more freedom. And I believe that continuation has not ended. But many people in the freedom community are still looking at the past. We got to return to 1776. We got to return to the Republic. I'm saying, well, what if there's more than that? Abraham Maslow, right, famous psychologist, hierarchy of needs. You know what he said in his book? He specifically talked about this idea of anarchy, and he says many people don't study this. They don't know what this is. They make judgments about it. He says, if humanity wants to get to the level of transcendence, which is above self-actualization on his pyramid, they need to understand this concept. And when I read that, I was like, whoa, right? And that's just one psychologist. But the further you go, Carl Jung talking about how the state is treated like a god and how it's called political doctrine, that's just another word for statism. Mm-hmm. So when you start to see these parallels and you don't see anyone in the medical community talking about this mindset, and all the people in the freedom community are still cheering on their cheerleader or the person in power saying they need to give us health, I'm like, wait, what happened? I thought you said we had to vote with our dollars and choose what products we want to buy in the grocery store. Now we have to actually vote in politics? What's going on here, right? Because if we vote with our dollars, this is a voluntary act. This is supporting the market and supporting different things we want to support. And then, like you said, it's saying no where you don't want certain products. Can we simply say no? Or do we have to find a workaround? Say, I got to sign my name a certain way on a piece of paper, the common law, the assemblies, the state nationals, right? That's their method. Or do we have to vote a new law in office or a new person in office? That's the Republican, that's the Democrat, that's the Libertarian. They're falling for the same game that has been going on. And I'm telling people, if we want true freedom, true health, we need to take responsibility. We need to encourage self-ownership in everybody. And that requires teachers. That requires a shift in consciousness. And I believe medicine can assist that greatly, right? Even, I've interviewed people about entheogens and mushrooms, right? And getting people connected to nature, right? That ties in, right? Those hippies over there. I look like a hippie, right? Got the long hair.
I don't see the ponytail. Where's that ponytail?
There it is.
There, Super Don used to have one of those.
Yeah. But you go back to the 60s, right? You see Alan Watts. And so this stuff is moving. You see the Mises Institute. It's moving along, but we also are seeing that there is a tyranny growing in this world. And we're reaching that climax where we have to choose, like you said, are we going to build a new system, or are we going to recognize what we've always been? Humanity at our fundamental level, like the abolitionist said, our country is the world, and our countrymen are all mankind. Can we get to that point? That was the main motto on the main abolitionist newspaper in the 1850s.
Well, we're again most vulnerable to this concept of authoritarianism, masquerading as, do-gooder, moms and dads operating in various fields that just care for us and love us like our own parents. And that's, I don't know if you read The Authoritarians by Jonathan Emord, and that talks about post-Civil War to today, modern kind of political America evolution concept or de-evolution concept. But this, vulnerability moving forward is that so few percentage-wise in history have ever truly embraced freedom. And they've often been burned at the proverbial stake. or crucified or whatever, made martyr to, maybe it gives rise to a movement, but it also enslaves the population in fear. If I do that, that's what's going to happen to me. And I think part of our vulnerability is to the heart of what you said, not knowing who we are, and I'll add why we're here, and our true relationship to life itself, much less that which created us, which is not government. Although many people, even though they'd say, oh, I don't believe government created me, they act certainly as if the government created them, that it is their mommy and daddy, and they always seek permission before they do anything. And most people don't realize that the act of voting is a step down in status from the sovereign, if you will, that has been altered in meaning, maybe even in a dictionary perspective, to be tantamount to being a terrorist.
Mm.
And sovereign, meant, being self-rule, right? And I think, and I haven't looked lately at the modern dictionary definition of the so-called chaos agents of what is the word that you were using before, as it escapes me because I'm old.
Statism, voluntarism,
anarchy.
anarchism. Yes.
Anarchy, right? So we're taught that anarchy is chaos. And when I started studying this, Cory, a long time ago, I thought anarchy is nothing more than self-rule. But you had to give it a name and a tinge to it that means somebody you don't want to be around because they're dangerous, right? As you pointed out, the anarchists in the past were not the violent one. Where did that come from? I think artificially. They were peaceful and said, you know what, we don't want to be ruled by you or anyone. Oh, you think you're above it all. Well, that's not how I'm trying to project it from an ego perspective. But if you recognize your creator, being God, however that, and I know everybody's got a different perspective on it.
Sure.
And suddenly you look at these human systems of control a little bit differently. And as long as, our founders in many ways did get it right in certain aspects when we talk about the common law,
Absolutely.
don't violate the rights of others and you can pretty much have unlimited freedom. But if they also violate my rights, we sought out perhaps a government to work as an intermediary. But there's evidence that the Old West wasn't as wild and out of hand as they say, because there was an element of self-rule and also absolute responsibility was required. You didn't get welfare if things didn't go well. There could be charity, but it wasn't coming from a centralized authoritarian figure or government.
Yes, and so, it's that prime principle of, is the action voluntary or is it based on involuntary action? And I want to mention, anarchy goes back even further. So you're mentioning spirituality, you're mentioning God. Well, for the Christians out there, for the people who are also of the Eastern philosophies and religions, I wrote a book on Taoism, right? So you might know the yin-yang symbol. These were known as some of the first historically known anarchists, right? And again, this is a term, this is an identity. Well, if you're going with these philosophies and spiritualities, they don't identify as it. They're just living their lives. But they recognize that the government equally is just another identity, another attachment, another thing that doesn't need to exist because it doesn't. Like, what is it? A bunch of buildings, a bunch of people, like it's a piece of paper. Like, what is it actually? And, there's a cool animation online, which is like an alien comes down to Earth and he's asking a bunch of questions like, could I meet your leaders? And it's like, wait, you have leaders? Like, what's going on? Like, what's the system you got? And like, he's super curious, like what the humans have built. It's done by a guy called Man Against the State, and he has a bunch of animations, and some of them went viral. But Taoism is a philosophy a lot of Christians, a lot of people can actually resonate with because it's very basic. It's on that yin-yang philosophy of like, here's the masculine, here's the feminine. How can we see a balance? You mentioned mom and dad government, right? Oh, I want the mom to provide for me. Oh, I want the dad to protect me, right? So some of this is projected into society. I want that in a leader. I want that person who can protect me or give me all these things for free, healthcare and schooling, etc. And there's a question as to, again, the personal responsibility and how they are getting such means, right? Is it voluntary? Is it involuntary? Are they using other people at the expense? And, what other solutions exist out there, right? Jim Gale, you interviewed him. He talks about permaculture. How come we aren't taught about how we can grow food and have it all around us and create abundance and trade with one another and decentralize everything?
Independence is not good for authoritarians.
Exactly. And I mentioned what? The slaves didn't learn how to read and write. They were kept away from the very knowledge that gave them freedom. So knowledge is the prerequisite for freedom. not voting or changing something system or
Yes.
externally. It's about your connection to God, your connection to truth, your connection to nature. And that's
That
why
was it.
natural medicine is important. That's
Yeah.
why, self sustainability is important. And that's why these ideas are growing. Although these other systems keep, playing on people's mindsets using all
Sure, they
sorts of
keep pushing
psychological.
back.
Yes.
They don't want to let go of that control. One of the memes you've seen, and I'll reference Jim Gale in this context too. What is the ultimate act of defiance?
Hmm.
Growing your own food, for instance. It's like, wow, that's radical and violent, isn't it? We'll overthrow them because we'll grow our own food. But the reduction of dependence upon those authority figures who might even mean well, but are subject to being human, subject to power plays and um, even threats to their own autonomy or freedom or economic status, or threats to life of their family members, even, or
Yes.
compromising situations. All of these things play out. And, we have, what is that narrow path? If you talk about yin and yang, how do you
Hmm.
walk that narrow path so you're less vulnerable to it? Because we can all get cocky and then think we've achieved it. We've got freedom. And then suddenly, I always liken this to the last scene of The Devil's Advocate with Al Pacino and Keanu Reeves. He thought he won. He beat the devil at his game. And then at the end, the last line, he appeals to his vanity. He says, vanity always gets him in the end. Cory, dude, I love talking to you, my friend. And you can come back on anytime. I don't even have to do anything. I just sit back and enjoy it. And I appreciate you so much. Tell everybody how to catch up with you, how to follow you, and of course, this Health Revealed thing that maybe we can do some more with.
Absolutely. And, you could bring on Scott, Stephanie, Leslie, who are part of this project and hear from their perspectives, learn from their, many, many years in the medical field and their troubles and what they see and how statism relates to that. I mean, their experiences are incredible and they have much more experience than me. I'm kind of like the main organizer of this project, trying to bring people together, and I do a
Yeah.
lot of the tech side of things, but I would give a lot of credit to them for this project because of their experiences. It matters a lot. The people they talk to, the patients and
Mm.
clients they have, it's absolutely incredible. So, I thank you for having me on. And I want to say, as we move into AI, the AI that people fear, the robots, the technocracy, that which people fear is already present, and it's in the order follower. The person who just does what they're told, says, I'm just following orders, I'm just doing what the authority tells me. They are
Mhm.
the very robot, the very AI that they fear in the future. It's been
Right.
happening, it is happening, and that already can be addressed. But many
Yes.
people are worried about some future thing. This is just a man-made creation. So we're looking at it on an Eastern philosophy perspective. It's just another thing. We don't have to become attached to it. We can use it as a
Right.
tool. It can help free us, in fact. Now, just like the abolitionists had the printing press, now we have AI. We can free all of humanity. We have the potential to do it. Like you said, our potential is being taken away from us, but we have it within us. So thank you, everybody, for watching and for listening to this whole perspective. It's a whole new world, and
Thank
I
you, Cory.
encourage any practitioners, anybody out there, go to healthrevealed.org, and you can collaborate with us. We can interview you. You can collaborate in future works that we're doing. And then my
Mhm.
own channel is called Cory Nature is the Answer.
Cory Endrulat, God bless you, brother. Amen to all you're saying. I enjoyed having you on again, and we'll do a lot more. And remember, stop asking for permission where none is required. And certainly when it comes to your health and healing, the only permission you need is to give to yourself, because that which created us all gave us that spirit of healing as well. So thank you, my brother. Good to see you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.